Good afternoon and welcome to Ambition's Insolvency and Restructuring Trends webinar for 2022, hosted by myself, Chris Stark, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Harman Dunn. Thanks all for joining us today on a lovely Friday. I hope it's a nice break up to your day. Before we go into an overview and give a bit of a summary of some of the topics we'll be covering today, I thought it'd be good to give a bit of introduction to ourselves for those that haven't had the pleasure of speaking with us both. So I head up the advisory team here at Ambition, which encompasses both insolvency and restructuring and corporate finance. I've been with the company now for 3.5 years, focusing entirely on insolvency and restructuring hires. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Harman. Harman, do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro?
Hi, so I've worked alongside Chris on the business advisory team for just shy of 3 years now, I think. And I recruit from administrator up to manager level across the UK.
Happy days. With no further ado, let's move on to things. So topics we'll be covering today. So you may remember receiving a survey earlier this year. To those that answered that survey, thank you very much. Hopefully today, if you're listening or watching later on, you'll be seeing sort of the fruits of your labour there. We send out the survey out to insolvency restructuring professionals, whether that be trainees all the way up to managers and senior managers and directors. And we also send it out to hiring managers. So whether that be people working in HR or maybe partner level people that are involved in the hiring process. And today, what we're covering is largely the results of that survey. So there'll be a few graphs, a few charts, and what we'll do is talk through the findings and what that means for the wider market. We'll also provide some advice for job seekers and hopefully some useful recommendations for people that are involved in the hiring process at their current places of work. We'll finish off with going through the bit we get requested to talk about the most, which is around salaries. We'll skim through that fairly quickly, and we'll also leave time for Q&A as well. But by all means, if people have questions that come up throughout the webinar, please feel free to throw them in the questions section, and we'll try our best to get through to those as we go through. So conscious of time, don't want to keep people too long, and I believe, despite what people think, recruiters don't love the sound of their voice that much. So we'll go straight into things. So we asked insolvency practitioners and insolvency professionals the question of, do you expect to see more formal insolvency appointments this year compared to 2021? And looking at the graph, it's a pretty resounding yes. The last couple of years, everyone knows has been pretty quiet, certainly on the formal insolvency side of things, mainly down to government support through COVID. As we're seeing that support removed, whether that be furlough taken away and now bounce back loans need to be repaid, it's pretty obvious, or at least to us, that you would see formal insolvency appointments go up. And luckily, our thoughts are shared by the market pretty widely. Harman, do you want to sort of chuck in your thoughts about, I guess, the advisory side of things?
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking to see an increase in that as well this year. Informal insolvency appointments will go up. From what we've heard through hiring managers, I think that candidates with this skill set are in high demand as it is at the moment, and that's expected to increase, particularly at management level and above. It's not really expected to have sort of senior admins to have a lot of advisory experience, but particularly management level and above, that skill set's in high demand, and we expect that that's probably why more people are doing accounts qualifications now. We'll talk more about that later.
Sure. So yeah, we know it's going to get busier this year, but specifically we asked, when do we actually expect this to get busier? It seems crazy, but we're almost all the way through Q1 already. We're already into March. This year's already flying by. Results from the survey seems that Q2 is the most likely candidate in terms of when things are going to really peak. But Q3 also, a lot of people clearly think it's going to get busier around then. So it looks like the summer for a lot of people is going to be when they're really snowed under and have a lot of work coming in. This explains why we're already getting a lot of hiring requests now. People are trying to get the best quality candidates before the mad rush. And that is our advice for hiring managers is, don't wait for you to be drowning in work and needing 3 new administrators to process all the new cases you're getting in to then start a hiring process. If you're doing that, you're probably going to have missed a lot of the best quality people out there. Ultimately making a hiring decision under pressure, under time pressure, because you're so desperate to get someone in, is when you could ultimately make the wrong hire. You find someone that's not quite the right cultural fit, you get them in just because they can do the job, and then lo and behold, 3 to 6 months later, that person doesn't stay, and then you find yourself in the same problem that you found yourself in before. That's our advice, is to start hiring soon. And Harman, have you got any advice maybe for anyone that's thinking about making a move right now, I guess?
It's a good time to look. There was a massive spike just after Christmas in the new year when everyone sort of has a couple of weeks off to take stock, think about what they want to do. So there was a mad rush sort of in January, both with people hiring and both with people looking for jobs. That's now seen a bit of a lull on the candidate side, but the jobs are still there. There was obviously fewer candidates than there were roles, so some of those roles still active, some new ones popped up. We're expecting to see another pickup around sort of summertime, sort of just after people have salary reviews. So then again, the competition's going to pick up at that stage. So if you are actually looking right now or thinking about making a move soon, then now's the time to at least dip your toe and see what kind of stuff's out there, because in a few months' time, maybe even less than that, there'll be a rush.
Yeah. To summarize, also, we're thinking it's going to get busier. That's probably going to increase in the number of hires people need. So we did also ask specifically, what levels are going to be most in demand. And Harman, I think you're probably the best person to cover this, because this is a lot of this is in your area, I guess.
I mean, not much of a surprise, to be fair, that senior admins were the highest in demand. I mean, obviously, second to that is sort of admins and then trainees. But it's not a surprise, because it's been like that ever since I've worked here, to be honest. I don't know about you, Chris. I'd assume probably the same. Ultimately, these are the people that are managing the increased number of cases coming in. So naturally, those are going to be the people that are highest in demand. Generally, the demand for people at trainee level, sort of graduates coming in or people with sort of around 6 months experience, that's been quite low for the past couple of years. I think that's largely down to remote working. And I think that's made some firms reluctant to take on junior staff, because it's more difficult to provide that one-to-one face-to-face training, get people up and running on systems, sort of up to date with all the legislation and things. So it has been tough for recruiting at those grades over the past couple of years, but we are seeing a pickup. And I think that's firms now prioritizing entry level hiring to sort of spur on that production of the next generation, really. In terms of the levels above senior admin, so AM, manager, and then of course we recruit for levels all the way up to partner. Numbers are low for those, of course, but I think it's important to remember that we ask clients what level they are most in need of, or for this year, essentially what they'll most be in need of. It's not their biggest priority, but there's still plenty of opportunities out there if that does sort of fit you. If you're sort of an AM and above, there are still plenty of opportunities out there for you.
Sure. To follow on from that, I mean, the engine room is ultimately the case administrators. The reason why there's such a lack of people at that administrator level is, as Harman mentioned, not many people have really hired juniors 2 years ago, and now we find ourselves in a position where no one really has 2 years experience. We have lots of people at manager level, but not many people that sit sort of at that junior level. And it's key to know that, obviously, while I say we've not mentioned senior hires in here, there will always be a need for highly qualified individuals in the market. These are ultimately the areas that are most in demand. Not to say that someone that has filled in senior administrator head doesn't need someone as a manager as well. So it's key to note that as well.
So flexible working. So obviously that's been massive since the start of the pandemic. And I guess now that there's no work from home mandate from the government, it looks like hopefully this is kind of stuck, really, and hopefully we won't be going back to to a thing in future where everyone's either work from home or always in the office. So I think it's now becoming more clear what the new normal is going to look like. It is worth noting that this survey was released just before the mandate was lifted, but it was clear that this was the way that we've been going for a while. And yeah, as you can see here, over 50% of people are expected to be in either 2 to 3 days a week. Obviously, you'll always have people at the more extreme ends of that. So either people who are in the office full time, or some that are in the office completely remotely, so from home. So I think it will be interesting to see if firms will go to back to full 5 days in the office again. I don't think that will happen. It's sort of more leaning towards people just following what the market does. So whenever Chris and I have met with hiring managers, they've just said, well, this is what it is now, but that probably will change. We'll do what everyone else does. So I think if there are firms out there that, make people go in 5 days a week, then, obviously that might work for some individuals and teams. But I think the majority of people will want to see a level of flexibility maintained going forwards, or probably expect to see something offered. Don't know if you want to add anything on top of that, Chris.
Yeah, like I say, the trend is going to be towards hybrid working as a whole, and there will always be extremities to that. I think I'd point out that for those that are going to be doing 0 days in the office, I would expect that to be generally more leaning towards experienced individuals, maybe people with at least, I'd say, give or take three years experience, at least as a minimum, to be able to work remotely. I think firms are still quite tentative to let juniors work entirely remotely. The training and assistance needed when you're first starting your career, is quite important. I think generally, again, we're generalizing here. People that are maybe early in their career tend to prefer coming into the office a little bit more, and they enjoy the social aspect, actually getting face-to-face, time with partners so they can actually learn something. So I think our message is there are options for everybody. If you're someone that actually really wants to be in the office and your place is really pushing to work from home, speak to us. There are places that can offer that are really keen to have people in the office, and vice versa. If you're someone that has experience working from home, enjoys it works better for you and your family, or you just you don't really like the commute, there will be places that can offer remote working, and that's really helped with some firms that maybe are based in quite awkward locations where the talent pool might be quite small. So that's something we would always suggest to someone if you've been looking for a long time, because no one can really get to where you're based. Maybe there's one train an hour that goes there. Can you consider someone that's working 60, 70 miles away that can work remotely, do the job really, really well, and fixes a problem ultimately? So again, our advice, as it will be going throughout, will be, if you've got any questions around this sort of stuff, hiring managers or candidates out there, please do come and speak to us about these sort of things.
So salary reviews. I think clearly from here, the majority of people did receive a salary review or a pay rise in 2021. So over 3/4. What's quite interesting to see though is that just under a quarter of people didn't. So I mean, perhaps that was down to it being a quieter year than normal. But I think if you are one of those individuals that didn't receive an increase, clearly by looking at this, you can see that that's not the norm. So you shouldn't think that that's the case across the market. I think it's quite easy to sort of stay in your own bubble within your own team and think, well, this is just what everyone's doing. Clearly, it's not. The vast majority of your peers in other teams have received a pay rise, and I think with everything that's going on, not just sort of politically, but economically in terms of inflation at the moment, in real terms, you'll now be earning less if you're on the same salary now than you were a year or 2 years ago. You'll be earning less. You'll be getting sort of less bang for your buck, so to speak, when you're out spending. So you should have had an increase, because most people have. When we asked people, or when we asked clients what their plans were in terms of pay rises for this year, obviously the most common answer was somewhere between 3 to 5%. But there was also a good amount of clients who said they would increase each individual's salary to pay, dependent on not just individual performance, but performance of the team. And I think that probably links back to why a quarter of people last year didn't get that. It might be linked to not individual performance, but probably the performance of their company.
Yeah. What I would also add in there is that, you know, we don't suggest that as soon as you don't get a pay review or salary's not gone up, you should definitely be, you know, leaving your job. Maybe it is a time to leave your job, but our advice is almost always to ask for a salary review first. Is to put that question across and to ask why. I know there's a lot of firms out there that are, you know, looking around at what the competition is doing, and they're raising their salaries significantly past this. So there definitely are, you know, there's a reason to ask ultimately. There's a business case to be put in there for asking for a salary review. And as Harlan mentioned, so you're ultimately out of pocket at the moment if you've not had a salary review in the last couple of years. So again, we'll go through salary guides as we go on. But again, reach out to us if you have more questions around these sort of points.
PDRs. So obviously we know that career progression is something that's important to pretty much everyone. But I think one of the best ways to actually track this progression is to have personal development reviews or performance reviews, whatever you call them. So for example, at Ambition, we have those every 6 months. So everyone here is aware of how they're performing, what they need to do to move up to the next level or whatever it is they want from their career. They know exactly what they need to do. And as we can see, the vast majority of the market did at least have one appraisal last year. I'd say it's a small percentage, but still quite a significant percentage of people that didn't get that, 10%. But I think that's still fairly significant, to be fair. 1 in 10 people to not have had a formal appraisal. So I think the same message goes to our people on pay rises. If you didn't have one last year, that shouldn't actually be linked at all to performance of your company or performance of yourself. You should be getting one whether you're doing well or not. So I think the same message goes, don't lead to believe that's industry standard, because it's not. I think just a general tip on PDRs, just to candidates, when you go and have these, I assume that a lot of you probably were having them maybe just after financial year end in May, June kind of time. Have a goal set in mind before you go into that meeting. So for example, if it's doesn't have to be a specific salary, it could be a promotion you want to get involved in more, I don't know, trading administrations, or you want some study support, whatever it is. Go in with a set goal. Hopefully you get that. But if you don't, then find out exactly why. Get concrete, actionable points on what you need to do, so that next time you have your PDR, you've hopefully met those points, and then you get that. I'd say if you get to your next meeting, you've actioned all of the points that your manager has told you to do, but you've still not been given it. Obviously ask why. There may be a valid reason, but if there's not, I think that's when you can probably question whether there is genuine longevity in your career within that team. As I said, the best option even at that point may not be to move, but I think clearly if you keep having these PDRs and it's the same story again and again, but you're doing everything that they say, then clearly it's the fact that, you know, you're going round in circles. And if it is a non-negotiable for you, then it's probably time to explore the market.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the term progression gets thrown around quite a lot, and it's maybe quite a hard, nebulous term to actually pin down. What does that actually mean? For me, having these appraisals is really how you determine whether a role does have long-term progression. If there are no reviews, how can you really know where you're going? If you're a mile away from the next promotion, you need to be told at least what it is you need to achieve. So, you know, we always recommend have a clear set objective of, you know, where do you want your career to go? Make that very, very, you know, obvious to whoever it is your direct line manager. Ask them what bits you need to work on, and like I say, if you hit those targets and it's still not filled, then that's when a conversation needs to be had. And you know, we work with a lot of people where they have these reviews, they decide, okay, now I'm going to make a move, and then they hand the notice in, and then all of a sudden, these things that they've asked for have been now magically become available. You know, the question we would always ask is that somewhere you really realistically want to stay? It should never take someone handing their notice in to be given a plan to progression, and you shouldn't be promoted for handing your notice in. That happens more than people would actually think, where someone says my progression to manager, for example, to senior manager is being blocked, they decide they're going to leave and someone will give the manager, and then all of a sudden they get promoted straight away, which is kind of a really weird chain of events to say that you want to leave someone and then ultimately you get everything you asked for. Effectively means that the reason you were not progressed before wasn't really a real reason, because nothing's actually changed other than you've told them that you can find something better. So yeah, we're getting into offers there too much, but having those clear plans in place, I think, is essential. Otherwise, you can end up very, very quickly. 2 years go by, 3 years go by, and you're still in the same spot ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. So study support. I think what's quite interesting to see here is that typically the amount of study support that's offered is still a fairly small percentage of the workforce in general. But I think what's more interesting is actually the weightings towards different qualifications. So we're actually now seeing that there are actually a high number of people in the industry taking their accountancy exams as opposed to insolvency exams like CPI, CII. I mean, I don't think it's on there, but intro to insolvency, things like that. So the industry is definitely leaning now more towards accountancy qualifications. And I think that's probably in large part due to the increased need for people with an accountancy background to be able to do informal insolvency appointments, the advisory piece. So, I mean, that's what I'd say on that. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Chris.
Yeah, look, people that have advisory skills are becoming more and more desirable. There are more and more firms that are doing that type of work. I think typically that work has traditionally been seen to be done mostly by Big Four, big accounting practices, the consultancy firms like Alvarez and Marsal, FTI, AlixPartners, those sort of people. It's getting more done by boutiques now. They're taking on that type of work. And with the lack of formal insolvency that's gone on, pretty much people are having to upskill and do the type of work to survive, realistically. So formal insolvency skills are still super, super valuable. And what I would always point out is those that can do both are the real people that are in most demand. Someone that can not only work on a caseload of liquidations, but can also do an independent business review from scratch. Someone that has that kind of skill set and is still quite early in their career is of incredibly high value. So there are pros and cons to doing accounting exams or going down a more formal insolvency route. I know obviously there'll be people waiting for GIB results any minute now. Maybe even they might even come out in the last hour or so. But there's no right or wrong. It really depends on which path you want to take. There's an argument that maybe accountancy gives you more options outside of insolvency restructuring, which for some people can be a great thing. Insolvency is probably a bit more niche and less applicable to other areas. And again, ask your hiring manager. This is what your reviews should be around: is discussing where do you want your career to go? Do you want to be more? Do you want to specialize? Do you want to keep your experience fairly broad? And then maybe picking the best course of action in terms of study support for you. And again, we're more than happy to have those discussions. We're not just moving people into jobs. We generally offer career advice for people if and when they want it, really. So we also ask candidates out there, what are the most important factors when looking for a new role? It's a question I get asked by hiring managers all the time, is what are people looking for? What are the things that we need to do to get the best talent? There've been a lot of changes. I think what's interesting to note here is that last year when we ran this same question, that flexibility had actually outstripped salary as being the most important factor. I think that being that people had finally got flexibility in their life. Most people were working remotely, and the idea of going back to 5 days a week in the office seemed pretty scary for a lot of people. I mean, even for me now, I'm going into the office most of the week, and it's still a bit of a jolt. Thinking that I used to do this 5 days every week with no questions asked, really. That seems a bit mad now, actually, looking back at it. And that was not that long ago. But I think now, as flexible working has become more of the industry standard, and we've shown that in the previous slides, that most people are doing 2 to 3 days in the office. Almost as soon as it becomes industry standard, it drops off in terms of importance for people. People now aren't saying, well, I need to have flexibility. They kind of expect flexibility to be provided. So that's a key point. If you're a firm that doesn't offer that, I think you're probably missing out on a lot of good quality talent. But all that does mean is now that salary, has become the leading factor, and it's key to know that this is the most important factor. Most people, all 5 of these factors, and along with literally infinite number of other things that can be a reason why someone would look to make a move, will be important, but salary is now the most important, probably partly because it's such a competitive market. Salaries are ultimately going up more and more and more, particularly at certain levels. I think at the senior administrator level, there's almost a bit of a salary bubble at the moment that's driving up the salaries for everybody. And ultimately, once people know that they're probably underpaid by a significant amount, or that they can get so much more just by looking, and they don't even have to necessarily make a step up, they can make a sideways move. Salary is the bit now that people are really pushing for. But yeah, there will be a number of other factors. And Harman, career progression, company culture, I know this is quite close to your heart. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think obviously progression means different things to different people, depending on who you speak to. But I think for most people, it's moving up in seniority, a higher level of responsibility, or working on larger projects usually. But I think it's interesting to see it's a close second. I mean, it's probably very, very closely linked to salary, in fairness. Some people just see progression as sort of obviously, getting paid more for what you do, but also moving up. So that's I don't find that surprising, to be fair, that's on there as a close second. But in terms of study support, I was surprised how low that was when I initially saw these statistics released. I thought it would be higher, but it does make sense. It does sort of link up to the conversations we've been having. It's so much less common now than pre-pandemic to have a candidate come to you and say that their sole motivator for looking is that they've not been put on CPR, they've not been put on JIB. You do get it sometimes, and sometimes it's a nice to have. But I think the main reason for that being so low is probably because there are more people on qualifications now, or it's talked to them more in their PDRs, and that's it's no coincidence that the timing of that. I think that's because firms are attempting to retain their best staff, so they're not looking elsewhere for that reason. Because that's usually one of the easiest things to rectify, is just to give someone CPI support or put them on JIB or something like that. Company culture. I mean, company culture. It's an important factor for everyone, I'm sure. However, I think it's important to know these are job seeker motivations. So people who've listed here, the ones that if they were going to look, this is why they would look. So some people will be moving because either they've got a potential mismatch in terms of the team they're sitting in at the moment, or that they want to retain the culture they've got at their current firm in their next move. So I think that's definitely worth noting. Just as a sort of a sum up point for all of these are going to be the things that are going around in a candidate's head when they're interviewing with you. So if I'm talking to hiring managers here, so just putting the fact that you've got progression, company culture on a job spec or a job advert isn't enough to convey that message to candidates when they're interviewing, but we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, just on the study support side of things as well, more and more people are being put on JIB. I think there's most partners I speak to that are wanting to get the next IP in the door. They're asking me where are all the newly qualified people. There seems to be less people passing it all the time, so that's probably why there are so many more people being put onto that study support a little bit quicker. But yeah, I think Harman, you hit the nail on the head. Like, there are a variety of reasons here that someone might consider a move, and there's no right or wrong reason. It can be for someone. Company culture will be the chief thing, but it doesn't mean that salary completely drops away. These will all have a degree of importance to everybody, I'm sure, and there'll be other reasons that we couldn't even fathom to think of. If we included every single motivator that someone had, this would be a very, very long survey, and I think that people probably would have just skipped the question, to be honest. So that's the survey side of things. So we want to gives a bit of a summary. So one of the major takeaways is that this year is going to be incredibly busy. Probably one of the busiest years the insolvency market has seen, certainly in my recruitment career, and probably for a lot of people's entire insolvency career. the market's going to be incredibly busy and very, very competitive. For the last few years, it's been hard to get the best quality people. That is going to get even more difficult. So the time now is to make a move. If you're thinking that maybe I'm ready to move, you've been putting it off for a couple of years. There's a competition out there. Don't wait for everybody else to make a move. And ultimately, if you're in that level of administrator, senior administrator, you're probably in very, very high demand. So it's a great time to make a move. It's a candidates market now, and look out and speak to us, because there will be places that, even if they're not actively hiring, they probably will jump for the right person. They'll make a move right now. Like Harman, you work mostly with people at that level. Do you have anything more to add on that?
I just think you should know your value in the market. If it's clear 60% of the demand is admins and senior admins, so just by knowing that, you should know that if you're underpaid, if you're not being given the flexibility you want, if you're not being given the case experience you want, or the one-to-one sort of kind of development with your manager that you need, then you should know that someone else will offer you that. Don't just think that this is how it is. This is how either the industry is if it's the first firm that you've moved into, or it's just going to be the same wherever I go. It's not the case at all. Because of the demand of the market, employers have to kind of tailor to your needs in a way, and you can take your pick. Everyone, if you're a good quality sort of administrator, senior administrator who knows his stuff, then I can guarantee you that you can at least get 5 firms that want to speak to you, and at least one of those probably you'd be interested in. So definitely know your worth.
Yeah, and following on from that, don't really know your worth, but be aware of what is actually going on in the wider market. Even if you're not considering a move, you might be quite content where you are. But it can be very easy to become blinkers, especially if you've maybe spent 3-4 years, maybe that's your entire career, and it's all been at the same firm. All of a sudden, that becomes your norm. There's nothing else that you know outside of that. What you think is the standard actually could be the complete opposite. We've said about people not having appraisals. Some people might think that it's not normal to always have an appraisal every 12 months. Maybe you only get it when you're getting a promotion or something's going wrong, when actually turns out that's the complete opposite. And same for salary reviews. If you're in that 1/4 of people that haven't had a salary review in a year, don't feel like that's common. But it's hard to know that if you don't speak to people outside of your own bubble. Benefit we have as recruiters is that we're speaking to people across the entire breadth of the market, people that are looking, people that aren't looking, job seekers, hiring managers. So we generally have a fairly objective view of what is normal, what's not normal. Should you be given flexibility? Is what you're asking for completely ridiculous? Sometimes we do tell people, actually, you've got a really good deal where you're at, and maybe you should stay where the grass genuinely isn't greener where you're at, and we'll be honest with people when that's the case. But there are a lot of occasions where someone may think, actually, is there something better out here? And a lot of the time there is, to be honest. So yeah, that goes into flexible working options, which I think, Harman, you want to talk about flexible working options.
Yeah, I just think that the same thing goes really. If your current firm's not offering flexible hours, remote working, then just think about it and think, okay, well, is it like this everywhere? It's not. You can see that from the stats we've released. Most people are flexible. I'd imagine that most people listening to this are going in probably 50-50. There'll be a few that sort of sit either side of that, and there'll be fewer still that either work completely remotely. That's still rare to see, but it does exist. There are firms out there that will offer that. And then a handful of people maybe that are going in 5 days. I mean, maybe if you're a junior or a trainee, you may be going in, you may want to go in. I don't think there's anything wrong with being in the office, to be fair. It seems as if we've been talking about it as if it's bad to go into the office. It's not. It's important, I'd say. But I'd say, if you want flexibility in remote working, then it's on offer.
Yeah, I'll remember you said that. Maybe next time you're trying to tell me you want to work from home, I'll keep that you said that in mind. No, I think the point we made in one of the previous slides around different factors that are important are everyone is different. So our advice is to try and think, even when you are genuinely quite content in your role, think about what does the dream job, what's the end goal for you? What are the factors that are most important? is there a dream job out there that, even though things are pretty good, if this role came around that maybe offered me one day working from home and provided me with an opportunity to do GIB, and it can be a myriad of different factors, and that role may only come around once a year. Sometimes that's when we pick up the phone. A lot of the time when I help people, they are generally not looking for a move, but they said, if you have this one particular thing, then keep me in mind for it. And generally that's what we do, is we make note of it, and then that call could come in a week, could come in 2 weeks, could come in 6 months, but that's when we're calling. We're calling because we've got that one opportunity. But it's hard for us to make that call. I guess we've obviously had that conversation initially and really dug down into what are the most important factors for you, because what is someone's dream job is someone's nightmare, and it's not always the same thing. So that's what when we're asking to speak to people, that's usually the reason why, ultimately. So that's, I guess, advice for job seekers, and now hopefully some useful advice for hiring managers. So we've talked quite a lot about how there's a lack of quality people and how busy it's going to be this year. This is not just across insolvency and restructuring. This is, I'm pretty sure, nationwide there is a general lack of skilled talent across the country. Securing the best quality people is going to be so essential, in this market, and it's going to be harder than ever. So our advice is to beat the rush. If Q2 and Q3 you're going to be drowning in work, you can't then make a hire. Then it's very hard to actually start a hiring process when everything is going crazy at work. You've got cases coming in everywhere. You've got creditors chasing you. It's hard to get people time to actually do the interviews and to review CVs. It's better to do it when things are actually, you're at capacity quite nicely, but you're upscaling in expectation of things getting busy. That doesn't mean recklessly hiring 4 people before you've actually got work, but having a bit of a plan as to what we like to need. Do we have people going on maternity leave? All those sort of things. It's thinking long term, and that's having a question. Having conversations with us, we can give you an idea of what's actually out there in the market, and we can tell you about quality people that become available. And maybe if someone might become available that's perfect for you, they're just not. You maybe don't need them right now, but you will need them in 3 months. Our advice is probably worth having a conversation with that person. The more senior the hire, the earlier you need to start looking. You've got to factor in notice periods. Once you go past assistant manager level, most people are going to have 3-month notice periods. So if you're thinking you need someone in June, realistically, you should already be looking to offer someone by now, as crazy as that sounds. So if you're only now starting to even think about hiring, you could be actually finding yourself in a bit of a spot of bother, really. I always say to candidates, it generally takes, I would say, around a month to find a good quality person in a job, but to find a really hard, to fill a really hard role, that can take a lot longer, depending on how flexible somebody is. Start the search early. And then, Harman, you want to go, into, how to differentiate yourself as well. You're on mute, my man.
Just to add on to your previous point, I think similar to how a lot of your sort of business development teams, or if you're sort of posting on LinkedIn and you say to distressed companies that they should seek advice early, it's the same thing goes, both for candidates and clients, really. But I think that was just worth adding there. But for sort of what it is that's sort of going to motivate candidates and get them to look at your company as something that's genuinely different from your competitors. Salary isn't the only factor that's important. I mean, of course, it's probably one of the most important things all this year. When we release a survey, it is, but it's a concoction of different things. It's not just that. It's not just if you offer them 10K above market rate, but your culture's rubbish, there's no progression, and they're going to be doing the most boring job ever. They're going to go for it. So I think going back to my point on candidate motivate, is a job ad or a job spec just isn't enough to get candidates bought in. So in the current market, let's say an experienced senior administrator with a CPI qualification, for example, maybe they're even an accountant, they're in high demand. And if they are wanting to explore not just your opportunity, then they're going to want to explore the wider market. There's a high chance but they're interviewing with a number of your direct competitors. So the way that they actually base the decision, it's not just on what your company puts out online. You can't just rely on the brand or the name of your firm. If you are a very well-known firm, that's probably not going to be enough. What they base it on is the interview, who interviewed them, what was their general demeanor in the interview, did they feel as if they built rapport with that person. So it's not solely just what you say in adverts. And I think it's also not enough to say that we can offer progression, or we offer great progression, for example, because every single person said that. Every single person says that. They say, excellent progression, good career opportunities, will support you, etc., etc., etc. And I think after a while, candidates probably become a bit numb to that, and they probably just flat out ignore it. They're going to want to know that for themselves. So if you genuinely do have good career progression, I'm sure that most of you probably do think you do have good career progression, but give candidates tangible examples of that. So for example, if you've had, let's say if you look at your partners, 5 out of your 6 partners have been organically grown within the business, and they've started at a more junior level, for example. Or if you've had a particularly good example of, let's say, someone that's come in as an admin and they've progressed up to senior manager or something in a short space of time, show that and tell that to candidates. Give them names of people that work in your company so they can look them up on LinkedIn and see for themselves. Same goes for culture. If you just say you've got a fantastic culture, so what? Doesn't mean anything. You have to, I guess, display that in the kind of conversation you're having with them. I think a point worth making actually is sometimes interviews can be, or it seems that the trend is more towards having interviews where they're fairly conversational. I think most candidates like that. It's obviously good to have a bit of structure, quite a bit of technicality in terms of the kind of work they do and if they're going to be a good fit for your role. Once you've established that, I mean, you should be able to see it from their CV, and after speaking with them for about 10 or 15 minutes, you should be able to establish whether they can do the job or not. So the rest of the interview should be based on building rapport with that candidate. If you're keen and if you want them, they will have other interviews on the go, and they'll be comparing based on how well they thought they got along with you, and if they can I work with this person. So I think it's worth stating that point, that if you're keen on a candidate, you need to sell the role to them. Because more and more often, more frequently, candidates are acting like consumers. They're sort of as if they're going shopping and thinking this firm has this firm has this. So if you'd like a candidate, sell the role to them.
Sure. And one last bit I'll add in that is when we're saying sell the role to them, someone, it has to be genuine. It has to be what you actually believe makes your firm great, whether that is the culture. Maybe it's you've got a great tight-knit group that have known each other a long time, and you all just enjoy each other's company. Maybe it's flexible working. I know a lot of places that maybe have experimented with a 4-day working week or having reduced time on a Friday. If you think that's what makes you guys great, then put that at the forefront. Maybe it is that it's a really intense environment and everybody works really hard and everyone is a high achiever. Then if that's the case, then put that at the forefront, and ultimately that will attract the people that best suit your business. Because for some people, they might be put off by the idea of, it's, be honest, if it is a place where people are expected to work hard and everyone wants to really do well and push as hard as possible with their career, for some people that isn't going to appeal, but for the right people it will. And the same goes for the other side of the fence. If it is a really nice family firm, again, for some people that'll put them off, but for other people, that's exactly what they're looking for. And it's important to find interviewers that embody that. So whoever is the person you think, that's exactly what our firm is all about, get them in front of people that you want to be joining, and train them on how to interview, because it's a skill. It's not an easy thing to do, especially if you've never done it before. Get them skilled in not just assessing if someone's good enough to do the job, but also how do they convince someone that this is the best place for them to be. And in terms of staff retention, people think we wouldn't really want people to retain their staff, but believe it or not, we're actually here to help businesses. So look internally at what you're doing. We've spoken about development plans and salary reviews. These are all tools to help with retaining staff. But again, come and speak to us. We're more than happy to do salary reviews for people. Bespoke services where if you maybe have someone coming up for a review and you're not sure what you should be offering this person, but you really want to keep them on board, tell them about their experience, or tell us about their experience, I should say, and we'll give you an honest assessment. We're not going to undercut and so they end up leaving. If anything, we'll probably tell you some painful news that you need to pay them a lot more money. But in all honesty, it's better to pay someone what they're worth than it is to lose that person, and ultimately then you lose a great member of staff and you've got to replace them, and that's going to cost you probably more money than it would have been just to give that person a little bit of a pay rise. So I guess with all that talk of pay, we'll move on to the bit that I know a lot of people sort of hang on to this call for, was the reason why we leave it to the end, is to if we did this at the start, I feel we might lose a lot of people. So we'll skim through these, to be fair, because we will be releasing all this in a document so that people can actually review this and keep it to keep it to themselves and keep it on their desktops or wherever they want to keep it. And a key bit we would always point out here is that these are ranges. We're trying to ultimately classify human beings here who are all unique and different in their own way and have their own different experience and backgrounds into bands, which is very weird to do and very hard to do. So, there might be people here that look at this, go, wow, I'm way over this or I'm way under this. There may be a reason, but that's when it's the time to have a conversation, especially I think if you're under this, I think definitely have a conversation. If you're over this, then maybe sit and go, wow, how great am I doing? But what I'd also point out is that a lot of people now, I think that we're speaking to, tend to be near the upper end of these ranges now, especially if they're making a move. I think if you're trying to attract talent, for example, if you're trying to hire a manager now in Birmingham or in the Midlands in general, you're probably going to struggle to get someone good at 50k now, realistically. Now, there may be people sitting at 50k currently, but I think if you're trying to entice someone to move, you're going to need to move much closer to the 65k mark. That's the honest assessment. And in general, with remote working, how this is going to affect salaries for people based in Leeds, in Lancashire, in Yorkshire, I don't know, because there are people now that will be based in Leeds, will be working for London firms, and the question is, should those people be paid a London salary? If they're not, they're going to be the by far the lowest paid person in their team potentially, but they also don't have to deal with the price of London living. It's quite a complicated question that I'm not sure I have the answer to, or we have really time to go into, but it's an interesting point to think of as well. Our advice on all these salaries are, for hiring managers, come to us. We'll happily give you advice. We'll be honest. We'll be brutally honest. If we say that, the reason you can't find someone is because you're paying significantly below market rate, we'll say. If you're actually paying within market rate and you still can't find someone, then there's probably a bit more of a serious look in the mirror to be had as to why that is. And same goes for anyone that's seeking a job. If you're seeing any of these numbers and think, wow, that is way more than what I'm on, I think it's definitely worth having a conversation, at least with us, to find out why. There could be a reason why, but it's worth at least putting it out there. So I think we'll move on to Q&A. I think I can see one that's come through here. So I've got one here that is, what sort of experience is typically needed for an insolvency administrator? I have a law degree and also 6 months experience at a good company, but I'm struggling to be accepted by insolvency firms when I apply. Harman, this is probably one more in your area. Have you got any advice for this person?
Yeah. So to be honest, I think 6 months experience at a good company, but never seem to be able to accept it by insolvency firms when I apply. I think it's a mixture of things, really. I think you have to have, someone with six months experience, different to someone with absolutely no experience, probably there's not that much difference, really. So I'd say that probably the answer to that question would be going back to the demand for people. So it's for people that can administer a caseload from start to finish. Generally, that's the highest in demand, and there has been, unfortunately, a drop in recruitment at the lower levels, and I'd imagine that's why this person's probably struggling. So without additional context, it's difficult to answer exactly why, but it could be a number of things. Maybe you're making applications to the wrong firms. I mean, if the advertisement is maybe for a more senior position, then that may be why you're not getting it. But if you're applying to trainee positions, you're not getting it, then perhaps that's then maybe down to perhaps your CV's not as strong as it could be. If you are getting interviews, then perhaps that's maybe something to do with interview technique. Again, that's something that we can help with. But I think without additional sort of context to that situation or the actual experience that you do have within insolvency, then it's difficult to answer.
Yeah, sure. I think it's key to point out there that time, when people talk about I've got 6 months, I've got 3 years experience, it's not just the time, it's I guess the quality of what's been done in that 6 months. Someone could have been there for a year and had a lot of cradle to grave insolvency experience and really had a wide exposure. Someone could also have been working for 3 years, but only, for example, maybe working on MVLs, and that's going to limit realistically where that person that's only worked on MVLs. It probably limits how much they can, where they can realistically apply to. So it's not necessarily just the time; it's also the breadth of experience as well that matters. So we've got another one here this was actually said beforehand, and it's quite relevant given the day of JIB results. Is it worth me considering a move right after I get the results of my JIB? The market is really lacking in people that are JIB qualified. People are constantly looking for the future partners and directors of their businesses. So the short answer is yes, it's worth considering it. Doesn't mean it's definitely right to make a move, but are there opportunities? 100% there will be opportunities out there for people that do want to make a move. If you're worried about clawback costs, there will be people that will be willing to cover it for the right person. There will be options out there. So doesn't mean it's not a hard yes or no, but it's worth considering. I've just had another one that's come through here. Let's read this one. Would hiring firms take a dimmer view on candidates who have just recently been promoted, who may still be open to a move? I'm happy to answer this one. I don't think so. Not certainly from my experience. It depends what the reason is. If you've just been promoted, it doesn't mean that therefore they've got you for life. Maybe it depends on what level you've been promoted to. If you've maybe just been made partner, it's maybe considered a strange time to move. But everyone's different. Everyone's life, like I say, we've covered there are different reasons why someone may want to make a move. So it depends what that reason is, really. So I don't think that clients would take a dimmer view. Ultimately, like I say, it's a candidate short market, and I think anyone that really held that against someone as to why not to hire, that's maybe a place to avoid anyway. That would be my honest assessment on that. Harmony, you got a few of the questions that were sent to you, I think, as well?
I had some similar ones on like study support and things, but they're more about people who were part way through. So I had one about ACCA. So I've got 6 ACCA exams remaining. Do I have to wait until I'm qualified to make a move? And then I had a similar one sort of saying I've just passed CPI, but have it in my contract that I need to pay back the costs of the course if I leave within 12 months. Should I wait? So to answer the one on ACCA, well, that person's obviously midway through. I guess it depends on where you're at. So if you're at one of the larger accountancy firms like BDO or GT, places like that, then as soon as you qualify, your salary will shoot up. It will go up to 45, 50K. So you should know that. Not everyone always knows that. So it's worth knowing the fact that it will shoot up at some stage. And I think it's also dependent on, I mean, you obviously submitted that question for a reason. You're probably maybe looking for a move. So what's the reason for the move? If the reason for the move is salary, then I probably wouldn't move because salary is going to go up soon. I guess it depends how long it's going to take you to complete the rest of the exams. If you're very, very close to qualifying, let's say someone only had a couple of exams left, then it's probably not advisable to make a move. You'd be in a strong position if you're an accountant anyway, and you could ask for more on the market. So I'd say, yeah, you don't have to wait though. I just think it's worth bearing in mind that the vast majority of places you go to will have it in their sort of offer where you've got to complete your probation first. So that's usually about 6 months. So it will delay your qualification date by 6 months. Although there are a couple of firms out there that can just continue on from the day you start. In terms of the CPI question, yes, firms can cover your clawback. I think CPI, the highest I've seen was about £3,000. Usually there's somewhere between £1,000 to £3,000. And given that, administrators or senior administrators, particularly ones that are CPI qualified or CII qualified, they both carry the same weight, but both carry equal weight on your CV. You're in high demand. If anyone sees that, if a hiring manager sees that, they want to speak to you. There's not many of you in the market, let alone ones that are actively looking. So if you did go to market, someone would pay for that 100%. I actually had one that was quite interesting, actually, that I had to kind of think about and sort of plan out my answer to, but essentially it was, what's the process like dealing with a recruiter? So I don't know if this person's actually dealt with a recruiter before, or if they're asking because they've never worked with one before. But I think one of the things that sets us apart from other agencies, not just the fact that we specialize in insolvency and restructuring, but I know there are other agencies that do that and probably know just as much as we do. But I think the thing that differentiates us is the fact that if you come to us and tell us that you're looking to leave, the first thing we'll usually say is, okay, can that be fixed at your current firm? Other recruiters probably won't say that to you. And if that thing can be fixed, or if we don't think that a move is advisable or going to benefit you for the reasons that you're looking for, then we will let you know that. We will be open and honest with you. We will give genuine, impartial advice on your situation if you're transparent with us, and we'll be transparent back with you. So I think that's just a point I wanted to make before answering this. But it's also worth knowing that probably about 95% of the people I speak to day that are candidates aren't actively looking. Otherwise, I mean, if everyone was looking all the time, Chris and I probably be out of a job. Most people we speak to are just curious and they want to know about what the wider market is doing. They want market information. So whether you're actively searching or not, the first thing we do is have a detailed conversation about your current situation. We offer obviously advice on whether we think it's worthwhile making a move. If you then want to look, we'll get all your preferences. So type of firm, location, flexibility, all of that kind of stuff, culture. And then we'll talk you through firms and companies that can offer that. What we'll then do, if you want to progress further, is we'll send you a list of those firms, a detailed breakdown of each of them. And then once we've got your permission to approach them, the first thing we'll do is we'll directly call up the hiring manager, explain your situation, talk through the context of why you're looking, because reason for leaving is something that hiring managers want to know, understandably. And then if they're interested, we'll share your CV and your details with them. And if they're interested from there, we'll then look to set up an interview, and we'll fully prep you for those, because we know that the hiring managers, we know their general demeanor in an interview, the kind of questions they ask. We can fully prep you for that in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you were to apply directly, because you wouldn't have anyone there that already knows the manager, unless you're in a particularly sort of unique situation where you may know that interviewer. And from there, hopefully you would secure an offer, and it's our job to secure you your salary expectations. Essentially, we get involved in negotiations. Hiring managers, as we've stated before, come to us for advice on what they should be offering salary wise, and that probably concludes your sort of dealings with us. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah. Got a couple here actually that come through, both sort of related to GIB. So someone's asked, I have a GIB callback. What sort of range do you think a firm would demand if I were to move? Just tuition, or would they include time off, etc.? So that's a hard one for me to answer, because it's different for each firm. Some places will ask you to pay back the time off that you've taken as well. I think that's in the minority, but I wouldn't go out and say flat out that there aren't places that do that, because I know there are. So generally, it's just the tuition cost that you have to pay back, and from my experience, that generally goes down on a sliding scale the longer it is since you qualified. But again, everyone's different. My advice to anyone who is maybe in their callback phase and is considering, what should I do? Try and see if you can find the contract and find the actual study agreement that you signed up to. It can be quite awkward, admittedly, especially if you work at quite a small firm, because who are you going to ask? It might be hard to ask HR. But maybe see if you can find it in an old email somewhere. Or again, like I say, our advice is to try and look internally. But if you've got any further questions, we can try and talk it through. Maybe it's something if it's a specific firm, I might know, but without knowing the firm, it'd be impossible to give a conclusive answer. And someone else, quite interesting one here, someone that's GIB qualified and is actually maybe considering a move out of insolvency altogether. What sort of jobs can I look at in industry? Now, these are the sort of roles we don't get all that often. I'll be very, very honest there. I'm actually working on a particular role like that at the moment that's working in the commercial leasing space, and working on negotiating better arrangements for tenants. I guess without boring people that are completely not interested in that, I won't go into the full sort of breakdown of that, but I have a full job description for anyone who wants to hear about, I guess, moving into something out of it, because I know some people maybe they have their time in insolvency and they want to utilize their skills, but they don't want to do casework anymore. So yeah, I can have a conversation with that. Final one I wanted to go through, people asking around, are people now expecting candidates to do face-to-face interviews? One of the good things that's come from the pandemic is that people are more flexible and open to doing remote interviews and doing entirely remote hiring processes. That makes things a lot easier. It means you haven't got to slip out of work and put a suit on in a dress down office, which can be pretty awkward. But I think you do lose a little bit of the human interaction. So there are more offices now that are saying, yes, cancel and do maybe a final stage face-to-face. And in my opinion, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because it gives you an idea to actually firstly see the place you're going to be potentially working at. And I think you can get a much better flavor for what a culture is like by doing that face-to-face. So yes and no is to guess the answer to that. It's like probably not at first stage, but probably before an offer's made, more firms are starting to do that. I think that covers everything. I don't think we've got any more questions. I am conscious, obviously, we've gone on for it longer than I put in people's diaries. So thanks for all the questions, and thanks to people that have joined. And again, our advice is, as always, if you've got any further questions to this that maybe you didn't want to put in there, or something that's very, very maybe a long-winded question that's hard to maybe put in words, please do reach out to us. We're more than happy to take however long it takes to answer the questions people have and give some advice where needed. That's it. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks, guys.